My name's Donna Mae Paterino, and I've been directing the Matewan Massacre drama for several years. This will be our 11th season we're getting ready to enter into. We've been performing the Matewan Massacre drama in Matewan several times a year, and we do two shows that will be coming up in May, on May 14th at 11 o'clock and 3 o'clock. So if you get the opportunity, come be with us, okay? We're so grateful to Southern West Virginia Community College for the invitation to come today. We were able to do the show today for some 8th graders that are studying West Virginia history. And so we were privileged to do that today. And I just want to thank the college, and I want to thank Martha and Chris for helping us to pull this together, and all of my volunteer cast. The folks tonight will be recreating the events of May 19th, 1920. What you will see tonight are actor portrayals of real-life people who were involved in one of the bloodiest battles in American labor history. Each story will be told from his or her point of view. And before we begin, let me just remind you that at that time in history, there were no laws protecting workers. Companies were not obligated to pay workers real money, and many companies made their own currency. Today's drama is about a story about a small town. It could have happened anywhere in the southern coal fields, because at that time the Union was beginning to rise up. But this happened in Matewan, West Virginia, and this small town stood together for what they believed in. This event was actually a fire starter which ignited similar events across the nation. Workers everywhere began to stand together for fair labor laws. We want you to enjoy this performance tonight. I do want to make note that when we get to scene 3, we have a young man who stepped in this morning as a detective. He'll be reading his from notes, but the young man that normally plays that role was not able to come at the last moment, and Cody Jackson stepped in to play a detective. And I'm really grateful to him, and so we hope you enjoy the performance tonight.
My name is Ed Chambers. The same man Chambers was family ran in the hardware store right here in Matewan. And I'm proud to say that Sid Hatfield was my best friend. Sid was a few years older than me in that spring day in 1920 when the fighting broke loose. In fact, Sid had just turned 27 4 days before. As a matter of fact, I was 20. I reckon I looked up to Sid Hatfield as an older brother. Would have tried to do anything for him.
Sid Hatfield was one of the bravest men I ever saw. A crack shot with a rifle or a pistol, and he could whip a bigger fellow in the fight. He wasn't but 5 feet 6, couldn't have weighed more than 150 pounds. But no one crossed Sid Hatfield unless they wanted to end up with their face in the dirt or worse. That's part of the reason why I made him chief of police.
Sid was a real mountain boy. He was one of us. He grew up over on the countryside. When he grew older, like most people, started working the coal mines. Started there at Blackberry Creek, where his family came from. And a few years later, moved to the Auburn mines just across the river.
Maybe I should introduce myself. My name's C.C. Testerman. I was the mayor of Matewan in spring of 1920. Now you might think that's a fine thing to be, mayor of a small town. And there was a time I thought I had it pretty good. For a young man in those times, I done quite well for myself. Had a prosperous business with my name on the sign, Testerman's Jewelry Store. Had me a pretty young wife, Jessie. We had a little blonde 5-year-old boy we called Jack. But being the mayor of Matewan in spring of 1920 was no easy job, I'll tell you.
Ain't that the truth? The Wild West had nothing compared to the wilds of West Virginia and Kentucky. And Matewan was a real hot spot. And Sid, well, he was a real wild one, if you know what I mean. He liked the whiskey, he liked the ladies, and he loved a good fight.
Truth to tell, that worried me. Sid was too hot-headed for his own good, and he couldn't stay out of a fight. Why, twice, the winter before that fateful spring, I had to bail him out of jail. Once it's for possession of illegal whiskey, the other time he got hauled in for fighting. That boy could just never stay out of a fight. Some of the businessmen here in Matewan criticized me for keeping him on as chief of police after that.
Well, Sid was full of spirit, and we loved it.
In the spring of 1920, this area along the Tug River in West Virginia and Kentucky was the front lines in the battle between the coal operators and the United Mine Workers of America. In a place like this, where everybody knows everybody and is related to half of them, there's no use trying to straddle the fence. You were either for the Union or against it. I decided to go with the Union. And in these parts, Sid Hatfield was the Union.
Sid was the one we boys listened to. He was right there encouraging me that spring day in 1920 when I signed up in secret at the Baptist church. There was 300 of us that signed up that night. And well, I pretty much stuck to Sid's side after that.
After I made Sid chief of police, I pretty much let him run the show around here. And I'll be the first to admit, he enforced the law in a lopsided way. The miners could drink and fight and carry their guns as they pleased. And not many a Union miner ever spent a night in our jail. If they fought, Sid would separate them, and he had that special talent of reminding them that they were all working together for the same cause. And sometimes, if they insisted on fighting, he let them go at each other till they wore themselves out. But you let a company sympathizer break one fraction of the law, and Sid would have them behind bars in no time.
That spring, the Bob Filter Texas usual scare tactics wasn't getting nowhere. So the chief police was one of us, and we loved it.
When they realized those usual scare tactics wouldn't work, they tried to buy Sid off. It's a well-known fact that Tom Felt sent a message to Sid offering to pay him off handsomely and put him on a $300 a month salary if he would just cooperate with them.
I reckon Sid told Tom where he can go.
Trouble was brewing here in Matewan, and in a way my hands were tied. If I would have known how things would have turned out, I believe I would have left my job as mayor and got out of town.
All that spring, the Bob Felton Texas was evicting miners and their family. When they got off that train that morning in Matewan, I had a sense there would be trouble.
When they got off the train, they went to Aunt Hatfield's place, the Rise Hotel, and ate lunch, and then they headed out. And we knew where they were going. Sid came and got me, and we went up to Stone Mountain. And sure enough, there they were evicting families. When we got there, they'd already thrown Charlie Kelly's furniture out in the street, and Charlie and his wife were just standing there. Sid went up to Al Feltz, and they had words. Then Feltz shocked us all by saying he had court authority backing him up. So I thought we ought to come back here to make sure. To tell you the truth, I just wanted out of there before Sid drew his guns. So I convinced him to come back to Matewan and put a call into the sheriff in Williamson. Sure enough, the sheriff said they had no court authority whatsoever to be evicting those miners. So Sid says, well, then I can arrest them. So he had the sheriff send up warrants by the next train to Matewan.
My hardware store has always been the meeting place for the miners. And that night, that day, we got together, stood ready inside the store with our guns.
The detectives came back around 4 o'clock or thereabouts, and Aunt Hatfield fed them again. Then they commenced to saunter along the street towards the depot. I just wanted them out of my town. So I stayed in my store with my little boy and just prayed they wouldn't be any trouble.
As they walked past the hardware store, Sid stood up. I stayed close to him to hear everything that was said. He told Al Phelps, I have a warrant for your arrest. Well, Al comes back and says, I'll return the compliment. Pulls out a warrant for his arrest. This took us by surprise, even Sid. At the time, one of the miners ran to the Testament jewelry store, told the mayor that Sid had need of him. Out came the mayor, not looking very happy about it. He came. He took one look at that warrant and said, this is a fake warrant.
Not worth the paper it's written on.
And then all the fighting broke loose.
Oh, this was an exciting place to be back in 1920. It was an exciting time to live in this country, for that matter. A time of great changes, a time of wonders and disasters. World War I was finally over and the boys were back home from Europe. Then, like a punishment, the great flu epidemic struck. It killed so many people, even more than the war had claimed. It seemed, almost, that life was cheap. It was a time for grand gestures, great dreams, great drama, and great tragedy, too. You might not even be aware of it, but one of the most dramatic and far-reaching of human struggles took place right here in West Virginia. And Sally Chambers here, well, she and I were right in the middle of it.
We were right in the middle of this war on the working man, Jesse Testerman, Hatfield, and I. We were either admired or we were hated. The toughest time of our lives was spent right here in Matewan, West Virginia.
Sally, we stood for what we believed in. Can't blame a woman for that. in a time when it wasn't proper for a woman to witness what we did. You were always the strong one, though. You were strong enough for both of us.
But Jesse, you and I both, we witnessed beatings, we heard mine blast, gunfire, killing on a regular basis. But we stood together because we had to help those families that were in tent colonies, living in poor conditions, on strike from Stone Mountain Coal Company.
We could have written a novel on all this bloodshed. Then the truth would be told.
I had just married my husband, Ed Chambers. He was only 20 years old when he joined up with the Union. He, along with 300 other men, joined up in a single night at Matewan's Baptist Church. He was only 20, but when Ed joined up, he was at the center of all Union activity because he was Sid Hatfield's best friend, and Sid Hatfield was at the center of it all.
Ed Chambers was a lifetime friend of Sid Hatfield's. And my first husband, Mayor Cabell Testerman, was a dear friend of Sid's too. Our residents stood with the miners, and Sid and Ed stood with them. More than once we carried supplies to the tent colonies, especially to the children.
I overheard the men talking at the Chambers hardware store that my husband's family owned about how bad the situation really was. Work wasn't real good, and when there was work, the companies would hire you if you signed a contract with them that said you wouldn't have anything to do with the union, and you wouldn't even associate with anybody who was a union member. And what's worse, they hired spies to live right among us and pose as union miners.
Them yellow dog contracts is what they were. Our coal miners had no idea what they were signing, but when they found they could not join the union, that's when things got bad.
Them Baldwin Phelps detectives that were hired and came to Matewan, West Virginia, were nothing but thugs.
Sally sure gave them thugs a run for their money.
We witnessed so much. We saw too much. May 19, 1920, Jesse lost Mayor Testerman. He went down in the battle. He lived 4 hours, but he went down with the rest of them. And little did we know the courage that it would take a little over a year later to walk up the steps to McDowell County Courthouse and witness the slaughter of 2 more innocent, beloved men.
What happened in Matewan in 1920 gave us the courage to stand with Sid and Ed in August of 1921. These unarmed men went in hopes of clearing their name and were shot more than 15 times. I begged Sid to carry his guns.
But we lived through it. We lived through it. And after seeing this, we felt like we could live through anything. After Ed Chambers, my first husband, was killed in 1921, I went on and I married a union lawyer. And I fought as hard as I could for the I fought as hard as I could for the working man's rights.
Sally, I'm just glad we lived to go see those rights come.
I remember it was a drizzly sort of a day, gray and overcast. It was a Wednesday, May 19th, 1920. For some of us, it was the last day of our life.
My name is Albert Phelps. My brother Lee and I came into town that morning with 10 detectives. I was the field manager of the Baldwin Phelps Detectives. Our brother Tom ran the agency. We all knew this was a dangerous and important job, and I guess we all always expected trouble, but not the trouble we got into that day.
I had a bad feeling about it, even before we got off the train. But it was our job. We knew it had to be done. Those miners had broken their contracts with the Red Jacket Coal Company. They knew what was coming, and we were here to enforce the rules.
That's it. They had broken their side of the bargain. They had signed on the United Mine Workers of America, and they knew the penalty. They were fired. We were sent to remove them from the company property. They didn't own those houses, never had. And since they turned against the company, it stands to reason. They were nothing but squats and troublemakers. They had no right to live in those houses.
It was a bad time in the coal fields of southern West Virginia. Wildcat strikes had been breaking out all over the country. President Wilson tried to ease the tension by giving the union miners a little bit of a raise, and he appointed a commission to look into the problems in the coal industry. But here in West Virginia, the miners weren't interested in a commission or an investigation, and things just didn't settle down.
The striking miners were out for blood, and union organizers were stirring up violence of every kind. When the companies hired other workers to replace the miners, those union outlaws just wouldn't stand for it. They vowed they wouldn't let that coal come out of the ground. Laid off coal miners took to arming themselves with high-power rifles and breaking into company property. They destroyed everything they could get their hands on. They tore apart machinery and burned buildings. Sometimes they attacked the new workers. Sometimes they murdered them.
And of course, John L. Lewis and Mother Jones were traveling all around, making speeches, trying to get them all stirred up, trying to make it look like the coal mines were run by devils instead of just decent folks trying to do business the American way.
We who were understood there was a war going on, but the rest of the country didn't comprehend it yet. People on both sides were willing to kill and willing to die. And this here was where it finally hit the fan. Matewan was where the powder keg exploded.
But we didn't know any of that the morning of May 19th, 1920. For us, it was just another unpleasant job.
We met up at the Urias Hotel, which was run by Ann Hatfield. You heard that name before, haven't you? Well, this is not the same Ann Hatfield that was involved in the Hatfield-McCoy feud, though I expect it was a younger relative.
And although they shared the same name, Ann Hatfield and Sid Hatfield were not on good terms. Just by making us welcome in his hotel, Anson made us enemy of Sid, who was the chief of police here in Matewan. That's how ugly things were in the coal field at that time. You were on one side or the other.
By the time we all assembled at the Urias, it was getting on toward the middle of the day. So Ann fed us a meal before we got started. I didn't think any of us looking forward to that day's work.
How could anybody look forward to turning people out of their homes? But we had to do it. It was our job.
And if they had just let us done our job, it wouldn't have been so bad. However, tempers flared. They wouldn't leave willingly, but we had no choice. We had to put them out. Sometimes they threatened us, and one thing would lead to another. A few times, it's true, some of us got carried away and tore the roof off the house or destroyed some of the furniture we tossed into the road. These things happen.
But that afternoon, we were going about our business in an orderly manner. We'd gotten as far as the home of a certain Charlie Kelly. He wasn't home when we arrived, and his missus says, "Well, you'll have to wait till my husband gets home." Well, we didn't have time for that. We told her to get out, and she knew that we meant business. That's when 4 of us went inside and started hauling out the furniture. We were throwing it in the road when Kelly himself arrived. Needless to say, he was none too happy.
But then the real trouble showed up. Sid Hatfield and C.C. Testerman, the mayor of Matewan, and trailing behind them was a crowd of miners with their red neckerchiefs and their guns, every one of them itching for a fight.
Well, there was a standoff. Sid Hatfield walks right up to Al and said that the Baldwin Belt detectives didn't have the authority to throw these people from their homes. Hatfield was steaming mad, but Al stood his ground. He said yes, he had checked with the courts. We were entirely justified in performing our duties. So Hatfield demands to see the papers. Well, there weren't any. We didn't need them to take back company property. Al told Hatfield if he wanted proof, he could just go on back to Matewan and call the courts. Well, they argued a bit longer, but finally, Hatfield and the mayor went on back to town with that angry gang of miners still following. And we breathed a sigh of relief then, I tell you.
We went on about our work. We evicted 9 families that day. It didn't take long, but it was a depressing business. The drizzle kept falling. By about 4 in the afternoon, we went back to the Urias Hotel and ate an early dinner. There we packed up most of our heavy guns, but a few of us kept our pistols just in case we planned on catching the 5 o'clock train back to Bluefield.
It was almost time for a train. We were walking toward the depot. We had just come by Chambers Hardware Store.
And here comes Sid Hatfield again, and a few other crowding around. Hatfield announces that he's got warrants to arrest all of the Baldwin Felt detectives.
Well, Al turns the tables as neat as you please. I'll return the compliment, he tells Sid Hatfield. Pulls a piece of paper from his pocket. Tell him it's a warrant for his arrest, and that he'd be returning to Bluefield with us on the train.
That's when I noticed the number of guns everywhere. Armed miners were watching from the square. More of them were looking on from doors and windows all along the block. I thought I saw some hanging out of the upper story windows at the hardware store. Everything. Men with pistols and rifles. We were surrounded. I began to get a sick feeling in my stomach.
Then somebody ran out the square yelling, "Sid Hatfield's under arrest."
You could feel the tension building.
Then Mayor Testerman comes bustling out of his jewelry store. He was a baby-faced fellow with a big old pot belly. Demands to see the warrant.
Takes one look at it and says, "This is bogus warrant." And that was it. It was like lighting a match to the end of a fuse. And there we were completely surrounded.
But you'll see it all for yourself in just a few minutes.
I'm a coal miner and a patriot. There was a time, and I lived through it, when folks didn't think you could be those two things at one time.
My husband here gave his all for our country, fought in the Great War, and when he come back home in 1918, did they appreciate what he done for them? No, they did not. The conditions in the mines were terrible. It's common knowledge that these mines are the most dangerous anywhere. Why, many's the time my husband went for those mines before the sun came on the mountain and didn't come home until after dark. He's so tired, he could barely stand to get out of his dirty clothes. Our babies hardly knew their dad.
Back during the turn of the century, when mining first began, miners in West Virginia and Kentucky had to put up with the most pitiful conditions. In other places, like Indiana and Illinois, miners could have a decent life. Some even owned their own home. That was practically unheard of here in southern West Virginia. If you wanted to work at all, you had to move into their company town, live in their company house, and shop at their company store. Why, we didn't even get paid real money. They made their own money called script. And on payday, sometimes, after they took out what they said we owed for rent and food, why, they'd say we owed them. Mining wasn't so much a job as it was a form of slavery.
The miners had been trying for a union for ever so long, but the companies wouldn't let them organize. Before and after the Great War, there was a war going on here in West Virginia. That's the truth.
In 1912 and 1913, the Coal Company Wars was in the Cabin Creek, Paint Creek area, east of Charleston, and Mother Jones was right in the middle of it. We heard how she stood on the state capitol steps and told them like it was, why, we wouldn't keep our dogs where you keep your fellows. They struck in 1912, and those Baldwin Felt thugs were called in right quick. They threw the miners and their families out of their homes at gunpoint. We weren't there, but we heard about it.
And we prayed for them. That was the first time I ever heard tale of tent colonies. Whole communities of poor striker miners and their families living in tents right through the winter. Little children crying from cold and from hunger. And if that wasn't enough, there was the Bull Moose Special. It was an armored train, a train carrying thugs toting rifles. And they'd run that train going right past the tent city in the dead of night and shoot from them armored cars with machine guns. Shooting into tents, for God's sake. We never dreamed we'd be living through the same thing less than 10 years later.
Well, in a way, it was worse. After that strike, they had their union in 1913, but the coal company operators here in southern West Virginia learned a valuable lesson as well, and they tightened their stronghold on us. They wanted us too scared to organize, and they hired spies like that no-good C.E. Lively to circulate among us. Meantime, the price of coal kept falling, and the wages kept getting worse.
There was a real sense of community among the miners, even though we were all different kinds of people. Negroes from Virginia and North Carolina, and Italians, Slavic, and Greek people, along with us mountain folk. We had to learn to work together. We had to make do. And when the Union struggle came to Logan, Mingo, and McDowell counties, we learned that all different kinds of people can work together and suffer together too.
Things really began to happen in January 1920. That's when John L. Lewis, the new president of the United Mine Workers of America, gave his famous speech in Bluefield, West Virginia, saying, "Miners across the nation have been organizing since November of the previous year, and it was time for us to join the ranks." And he called for an organizing campaign in Logan, Mingo, and Pocahontas counties. And throughout the spring, that's just what we miners did. We miners joined the union, and the coal company operators fired us.
All up and down the Tug River, poor striking miners and their families were being thrown out on the street. It was only a matter of time before it happened to us.
At Stone Mountain Coal, every single miner joined the union.
And every single one of them was fired. At Red Jacket, less than 4 miles away, they say 500 men was fired.
In May 1920, when Matewan made the headlines, there were 3,000 of us miners right here on the Tug River that joined the United Mine Workers of America. Times were hard, but our spirits were high. We thought we could do it. We thought we could win.
I'll never forget the day they came and kicked us out of our home. Them Baldwin Phelps thugs coming up the holler with their rifles early in the afternoon. What could we do? They just threw us out, along with all our furniture, what little we had. And my mama's quilt, the one that I cherished so, they threw it in the mud. What was I supposed to do? It just broke my heart.
But we went. We went. We lost our jobs and was prepared to lose our homes. But we had made our pledge to the union.
Smiling Sid Hatfield. Same clan of Hatfield tied those 3 McCoy boys up to a pawpaw tree, then shot them. Why, let's let truth be known. Sid here ain't even a Hatfield. But Jake raised you though, didn't he? And he was Hatfield mean. Why, when I come to this town in the spring of 1920, Sid here was the so-called chief of police. That's the best joke I ever heard. Good, God-fearing, law-abiding citizens said Matewan was the worst governed town in this state.
When you came here in the spring of 1920, Charlie Lively, you came here a two-faced line spy. You called yourself a union man. You joined our union. You sold yourself, your wife, your 4 young ones amongst us. While along you was spying on us. Send those written reports off under your spy name number 9 to Mr. Tom Phelps. You call me mean? I reckon I can be proud of what I was and what I did. I wasn't no saint, but I believed in a working man to marrow his bones. But you ain't got no bones, Charlie Lively. You the worst kind of crawling snake there is. Charlie even opened up a restaurant right here in Matewan, right next door to Testerman's Jewelry. Had his wife feeding us union boys beans and cornbread while he could sit there and listen on our plans. and betray us to those Baldwin Phelps thugs. Later, when it was all over, some of us boys was called up to testify in Washington, D.C., and I heard a U.S. Senator say that what Charlie Lively did went against every right or idea he ever had, that he was a no-good snake. Now, I don't claim to be no saint, but Mr. C. Lively here is in no position to be pointing fingers at anyone.
See, Sid Hatfield here, he'd rather be pointing a gun. Sid Hatfield bears the blame for the bloodshed that took place in this town, and don't you let him tell you no different. I myself, and more than once, heard him tell his gang, and a bloodthirsty, lawless group they were to beat all. What'd you say? We'll kill every one of them Baldwin Phelps detectives.
Detectives? Thugs is what they are. And thugs is what we call them. They took money from the fat co-operators for throwing women and children out of their homes. Tell them, Charlie, how those two Phelps boys, Albert and Lee, and the rest of that bunch of boys spent that morning of May the 19th. What was their job, Charlie? Forced a little child out into the drizzling rain at gunpoint. Drove a pregnant woman and a sickly child out into the muddy road. Old and firm, babes and cribs, hell, it didn't matter to them, out they went. Had to find some place to live. Abandoned shack, or maybe that tent colony up at Lick Creek.
I don't care if those men could read or not. They signed their contracts. They knew what would happen.
Yellow dog contracts. Another example of how companies operated in Mingo County. Man couldn't get a job unless he signed and swore he wouldn't join the union. Bosses held all the cards, the politicians were in their back pockets, even the legislators in Charleston backed them up, and that's the very reason we had to fight the way we did.
You know what? Those Baldwin Phelps men, they were doing their jobs that morning. They were paid to do a job, and they done the job they were paid to do.
Well, later when it was over, a bunch of us boys went up there, and we confronted them. And Albert Phelps lied to my face, said he had the proper authority to evict those people. He had no authority. I should have killed Albert Phelps right then and there.
You had in mind to kill Al Phelps, all right. You had in mind to do a whole lot more than that, Sid. Tell the truth. You planned it so the killing would serve your purposes. Tell them the truth, Sid. What did those two telephone operators hear you say when they called down Williamson looking for warrants for our boys? Tell them what you said, Sid. We'll kill every one of them Baldwin Phelps before they get out of this town.
Well, you know, there's a limit to what a man can take.
It was premeditated murder, Sid. It was nothing but a cold-blooded slaughter. But it served your purposes real fine, didn't it, Sid? Mr. Folk Hero. National name. Well, you even got yourself a pretty little wife out the deal, didn't you?
This guy. There's a train leaving Matewan in 10 minutes, and every one of you boys are going to be on it.
You'll be on it with us, Hatfield. We got a warrant for your arrest.
Get the mayor.
You should have taken Tom's offer.
Yeah, but Sid Hatfield's not for sale.
Yeah, we'll see about that.
What's the problem, Sid? This warrant's worthless. It's not even worth the paper it's written on.
The way you boys took me out of this town is deal.
That's the way you want it, Hatfield.
When the smoke finally cleared, there were dead on both sides. Several of those Baldwin Phelps detectives and 3 of our own, including the mayor.
Yeah, you got so many of us because you was lying in wait for us. We walked right into an ambush.
Well, you boys are armed to the teeth. You had Thompson submachine guns. All we had was bird rifles and rusty old guns from the last century.
We had machine guns all right. They're in those suitcases.
Everybody here knows Sid planned this whole thing so he could kill the mayor. Him and Jesse were found in a hotel in Huntington not 10 days after this gunfight.
That's the stupidest thing I ever heard. Why would I take a chance on getting killed in the streets of Matewan by 10 armed men just to knock off the mayor so I can marry Jesse? If I wanted to kill him, I would have shot him from the woods. Just like your young token thugs killed our union miners. Everybody would have thought the company was behind it.
Y'all can say what you want about me, but you don't know how it was back in my day. A woman couldn't hardly survive without a man, and I had a 5-year-old son to support. And Mr. Testerman told me plainly, Jesse, if something happens to me, you go and marry Sid. And as for Sid killing Cabell, well, that was just a rumor started by them Baldwin Phelps to slander Sid.
Hey, your mayor was about to see things our way.
They found us in that hotel. We already had a marriage license. Just hadn't found a preacher yet. I know we was a bit hasty getting together so soon after the gun battle, but Cabell was a dear friend of mine. And he always said that if anything ever happens to me, take care of Jesse. A lawman's got to do what a lawman's got to do.
Well, all that talk about Sid and Jesse sure gave this town something to talk about. But the real news is that 12 of our Matewan miners were accused of murdering them Baldwin Phelps thugs. Took them over to the county seat in Williamson and was going to try them for murder. Well, my Ed and all the rest were found not guilty. There wasn't no jury in Mingo County going to convict our boys.
But that wasn't the end of it. The guy that ran the Baldwin Phelps agency had 2 brothers killed in a shootout. He wasn't about to let Sid get away with it.
Yeah, they trumped up false charges against Sid in McDowell County. They figured if they couldn't get him in Mingo County, they'd try over there where they had more friends.
We was all worried about what would happen down in McDowell County. But Sid Hatfield knew he was innocent of that charge, and Sid Hatfield never backed down from a fight. They shot him down like dogs in the street.
They murdered Sid and Ed while they were walking up the steps to the McDowell County Courthouse.
It was that C.E. Lively and them Baldwin Phelps thugs.
Dad! It was an eye for an eye.
It was cold. Murdered him in cold blood.
An eye for an eye.
And what's even worse, they got off scot-free. C.E. Lively and his thugs put guns in the hands of our 2 dead husbands and claimed they killed them in self-defense.
Ain't nobody can prove that.
I'll prove it.
Yeah, Sid sure got things riled up. He was the only lawman to ever stand up for us coal miners. And the thugs who murdered him were never even tried. That was the last straw. The coal company operators had the politicians in their back pocket. Therefore, the law never seemed to work for us coal miners, so we coal miners took the law into our own hands. The United States government called in fighter planes and machine guns to stop us. Those things had just been invented only a few years earlier during World War I, and they turned them on their own citizens. But we held our own. A few years earlier, me and some of the fellows had just returned from defending this country in World War I. So what were we supposed to do? Fire on the same uniforms that only a few years earlier we had been wearing? Why, that would be like spitting in the face of all those soldiers who died fighting beside us. But the die had been cast, and eventually we won things like a 40-hour work week, health benefits, and labor laws. Things you folks probably take for granted. But if you don't remember anything, you remember this. You probably wouldn't have these things had it not been for people like Sid Hatfield and the folks of this small town who stood up and refused to be pushed around anymore. Thank you, and God bless you.
We do want to remind you that May 14th in downtown Matewan in front of the Union Hall, we'll be doing this again at 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. And as we always do, I don't know how many of you did get a program coming in, but this is not really what you do in a theatrical performance, but we do this on the street at Matewan, and I'm so proud of this volunteer cast. These folks don't get paid anything. Most of them had to turn in a sick day today at work just to be here, and we've dedicated the whole day to this, and I really appreciate them. And I just want to go down the list here and just step forward when I call your name. Playing Ed Chambers is Mr. Mark Meadows. The role of the coal miner is played by Joe Chapman. Mr. C.C. Testerman, our mayor, is played by Mr. Chris Gray. We have a coal miner on this other side, Mr. Billy Taylor. The hero and the first time playing Sid Hatfield is Mr. Eric Simon. Eric usually plays C.E. Lively, and they just kind of interchange, him and Ronnie, so he stepped into the role of Sid, and he did a wonderful job. And the infamous C.E. Lively is played by Ronald Linville. We have another coal miner this evening, played by Mr. Jeff Dixon. And making her debut with the Matewan Massacre drama is Miss Allie Paxton as the coal miner's wife. Another debut this evening as Jessie Testerman Hatfield is Miss Ashley Daughtery. We have the infamous Mr. Baldwin Felt Detective Albert Feltz, played by Cody Jackson. And thank you again for stepping in like that, Cody. Mr. Charles Scott plays Mr. Lee Feltz. Mr. Don Crevail is one of those infamous detectives this evening. We appreciate our sound man up in the box, Mr. Roy Tiller. I'm Donna Mae Paterino, and I play the role of Sally Chambers. And again, it's been great to have you. Thanks again. We'll see you soon.